do here is a demonstration of value drawing. So you might be able to see, in fact you will be able to see in a second, that when I begin to lay in these negative shapes here, like that, as a big broad stroke, that I can create a really hard contrast. And it can be quite dramatic to use it in drawing. The Italians during the Renaissance had this Italian word called chiaroscuro, which means dark to light. So I'm still, even though I'm still working with an additive technique, you might notice that I'm really working the edge of this egg. And if I wanted to, if I accidentally went through the egg thusly, okay, I'm dragging some of this material into the egg because it's so grainy and soft. But if I want it to go away, I can begin to manipulate it to work from light, from dark to light. So in this area here, were I to take this putty eraser, really push it in there, I can begin to lift off some of this material. You can also use the eraser as a blending tool. Remember again, the light source is still coming from that side, so I'm going to step over here for a second, and I'm going to find this really nice contour edge here, and I'm going to use it to create my underside. One of my favorite things about drawing is that it's so malleable that you can lay down a form. You might notice here that we still have some of the tooth of the paper coming through, these little bright white highlights. I'd like those to go away because they compete with the drama of the lighter part of the drawing. So I'm going to work this into the paper some. We're using expensive equipment here, and I don't want to get any dust on them. And you might notice that I've picked up a lot of charcoal with this piece of towel. Some people like to use chamois cloths. There's all kinds of things you can use. But one of the cool things about this is that you can also use it to bring some value back into the drawing. Like you can use it as a way to start to get rid of, and I call this getting rid of your whites. Because eventually, what you want this thing to do is to be devoid of, you want the whites to be the places where you create the most amount of drama. Light source, again. So I'm going to dive into this particular area of this egg. And right along this edge here, using this, this piece of compressed charcoal, this is the farthest thing away from the light source. Okay? And I'm going to call that my darkest part of the value scale. It's going to rival this, okay, for drama purposes. Sight-wise, it also helps to create this lighter edge here of this second egg shape. So we have a negative space, a positive shape, and then something sort of competing with that other shape. Actually, the border of this orb here is one of the things that helps us to find it is the contrast of this against that. So I'm going to begin to work these darks a little bit, again with my my stick of compressed charcoal. And you notice that I'm just kind of finding that edge. And here's one of the cool things that happens is the closer you get to the light source, the lighter your marks get, because you're indicating you're suggesting something that isn't really You're creating an illusion is really what you're doing. There's a shadow under here. This egg sort of sits on the table. There's a nice soft light over here on this edge. We'll get to this part in a moment. But I want to stay on this guy for a minute. And I want you to see that as we get closer to the light source, the egg, the shape of the egg actually gets a little bit lighter. So you've got your darkest place here, almost like it being, I don't know, when it's midnight in Sydney, Australia, it's high noon in San Francisco. I just made that up. I hope that's right. And then, of course, we want to get rid of these whites because we want to have our value scale suggest volume. And as you can see, because of our light source on the right, we have a highlight somewhere just about here. I'm going to put that in there like that. And I'm going to work it. I'm going to go back to my softer charcoal. And I'm going to work this just a little bit. Come in that way. What I'm starting to develop here, folks, and because is on the shadow side, we also have these solids casting shadow. So at the termination point of, like at the nose of this shell, we have a shadow shape that begins to sort of go that way, and it's the result of light coming this way. And one of the things we can also know is on this side of this egg, on the left-hand side of this egg, we also have start to have a shadow shape. I like to rough those in. On this side of this egg, here's another shadow shape. And the shadow actually has an anatomy of its own. I'll talk about that in a second. But I just want to rough these guys in. And I want to lay in this shadow here. And on this side, the left-hand side of this shell, you can also see that there's a shadow shape. So I'm just kind of starting to rough those in. I'm really taking notes on the thing that I'm seeing. Sometimes for your contrast, you really have to overstate it. You really have to overstate your values, overstate your blacks, and in some ways that makes the highlight point more dramatic.